And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call, as tonight the Indiana Hoosiers get back on the winning track after their rough three-day sequence out in Maui, and they demolish a team that they should demolish, wiping the floor with Alcorn State to the tune of 112-70 tonight. It's a game that featured a pretty subpar effort from Indiana in the first half, I think, and I think most people would agree. But I think most people would also agree that the Hoosiers came out and played much better basketball in the second half. And so, as we always do, we will break down tonight's game, talk about the ups and the downs. We have our full roster with us, as Andy, Ryan, and Will are all here. And we'll also, spend a little time looking back at Maui because Ryan was there, and he'll have some insight for us on how the Hoosiers looked up close and personal. And then, of course, look ahead to the Duke game that is coming up on Wednesday. I'm your host, Jared Morris. I will say before we begin, make sure that you go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on our email list if you aren't already. 1,300 plus IU fans get our regular emails, and you want to make sure that you get them too to stay updated and educated as we go through this Indiana season. Well, let's start out tonight like we always do, going around the horn. I will begin with the banner moment. And for me, it's simply that Indiana, I thought, really came out and played with more purpose in the second half. If those of you who watched the halftime report saw that it wasn't sunshine and rainbows despite Indiana's 19-point lead, because I didn't feel like Indiana played very well in the first half. They gave up 12 offensive rebounds. Alcorn State scored almost a point per possession. The turnovers weren't good. And Indiana just didn't look like a team playing with a lot of purpose. They looked like a team shooting very well, but we've talked about the difference between shooting well and playing well a lot on this show. And I thought in the second half, Indiana played well. They took care of the ball better. They rebounded better. I thought overall the defense was better, even though it doesn't show up in the numbers. But there were a couple fluky shots that Alcorn State hit when Indiana was playing good defense. So I thought the defense was better in the second half. And to me, that was a sign of progress. This is not a team or program that has always played well in second halves of games. And games like this against inferior opponents where the score gets into 30-point margins, a lot of times you'll see teams let up. And I thought Indiana really played well really for the whole second half, except for that last 4-minute spot where the subs came in. If you look at it, Indiana outscored Alcorn State 15-7 in the first sequence. It was 5-5 after that, then 16-7 and 17-9. Those are all between TV timeouts. And that's what you want to see in a game like this, a team like Indiana that is superior athletically and talent-wise really come out and assert their dominance. And the Hoosiers did that in the second half, which is about all you can ask for in a game like this where you're looking for momentum heading into Duke. And I thought after a first half where Indiana jumped out to the 15-2 lead, and then they played Alcorn State relatively even for the final 16 minutes of the first half, 38-32, the Hoosiers really came out, played much better basketball in the second half, and cruised to the 40-plus point win, which is really nice to see. What will it mean? We have no idea. Again, you can only take so much from a game against Alcorn State, but if we're looking to build something positive heading into Wednesday and put the ugly thoughts of Maui behind us, I thought Indiana's second half performance tonight, as much as it could against Alcorn State, for the most part, did that, and so I will take that as a positive, that things are hopefully moving in the right direction. Let's see what the rest of the Assembly Call crew thinks, and let's go around the horn. Andy, we will start with you, your bottoms line on tonight's IU victory.
Well, for one, I'm glad that everyone's back so that I won't subject anyone to a half hour's worth of a run-on sentence of ramblings from me after watching that UNLV game. So glad to have everyone back and be at full strength. I don't know. I said this to you in an email earlier today. I just don't know what we're going to learn from this game. I probably walk away from it feeling a lot like I did after some of the exhibition games in terms of, do we really know much more about this team than we did coming in. I think if I want to take a positive out of any of it, it was that effort level in the second half, and that has to become a constant. I talked a little bit about that, after the UNLV game. You've got guys who are incredible athletes that simply just didn't seem to be trying that hard to play defense and to do a better job and to make improvements and cut out silly mistakes. And I thought we saw more of that in the first half of the game. And while I didn't watch the halftime report, I found myself nodding along to your tweets in the first half in terms of, just getting beat on effort plays, not blocking out, giving up, easy baskets there, giving up so many points off of turnovers where, 2/3 of the points scored by, by Alcorn State in the first half were off of either, second chance points or turnovers. And those are just easy baskets that are, not in every case preventable. Shots are going to bounce weird ways, but you just had guys chasing the ball and not really blocking out. So I thought that effort level was a lot better in the second half, and that is the one thing that has to become a constant for this team. Because they're probably not going to be great defensively, but you can mask a little bit of that just with effort. And I thought the effort in the second half was was a step in the right direction, and it only means something though if they come out and start to show that with regularity, and not just Wednesday at Duke, but each and every game after that, and that starts to become something that they're known for, because right now that isn't the case. So hopefully a step in the right direction, although I'll probably find myself throwing cold water on some other potentially positive points as we go forward. But I guess the second half, to play well in that second half is as good as you can ask for in a game like this, and we'll move forward from there.
Ryan, fresh off being out there in Maui, how's it back being back in the continental United States, and what was your rant about tonight's game?
By the way, that was the worst trip to Maui I've ever taken. Everything else was great. The basketball, we'll get into that, but yeah. I mean, it was depressing. It cast a pall over the entire thing, but I think my point, it's similar to Andy's. I just think that at some point you've got to have your effort match your ability, and these guys are clearly insanely talented and just weren't showing. I don't think it's. I'll amend that. I don't think it was effort was the problem. They're just not smart defensively. They really aren't. I mean, they try. They just are not smart. And I thought tonight there was a little more. Their effort was more well-directed into the right things than just running around, which seems to be the standard default defense for Indiana this year. Is just, let's run after the ball. I think James Blackman Jr. was sort of the epitome of that tonight. I thought he actually played defense for the, I've seen him do that for about 5 minutes in his entire IU career. So he did it for a sustained effort tonight. And, that also led to points for him. I mean, he had a career high. What, he finished with 33. And, 4 steals and just seemed to be in the right position defensively. I mean, things like that aren't that difficult if you just focus on what you're supposed to be doing and actually put the effort out to play that kind of defense. And, it paid off. And look, I agree with what Andy apparently said to you in an email, is that you weren't going to learn much about IU tonight. This is one of the worst teams in college basketball they were playing. But at the same time, you do have to feel good about, after what we saw in Maui, to see, okay, at least now they seem to be taking some of these things seriously. I mean, the offensive rebounds were a disaster in the first half of this game. You saw them adjust and make some changes in the second half. Again, you said it. Some of those are Andy said it, some of those are just going to be weird bounces. I mean, that happens. But at the same time, it's, if you block your man out instead of just going after the ball, those weird bounces don't turn into offensive rebounds with easy buckets on the end of them. So I think they really cleaned some things up at halftime, and that's encouraging. And, the last, 7 or 8 minutes was pretty much just the game was over at that point. And it's been a while since we've seen that. And it was kind of nice to just kind of close it out, slowly and just have it done and move on to the next one. There are several times we've seen them play terrible teams and just let them back in it because the effort's gone, and they did not do that tonight.
Absolutely. Will, your stat of the night.
All right, stat of the night, as you guys said, I'm going to compare the halves here. Turnover percentage. First half, 22.2% of the possessions were obviously we're turning the ball over, and we cut that down to 11.4% in the second half, so obviously some improvement there. And then another one obviously would be giving up offensive rebounds. We gave up 12 in the first half to only 3 in the second. So, again, like you guys said, much better second half, but definitely the improvement in those two categories I think were definitely the most crucial parts.
Yeah, that was big, and those were, again, two of the numbers that I think everyone was really looking at coming in. Turnover percentage, rebounding percentage, because both of those, Indiana was just terrible in Maui. I think the other number, was free throw shooting. Indiana hasn't shot free throws very well, which is strange. But tonight, a little more focused effort from the line, 76%, 19 for 25, which was good to see. Andy, let me ask you, look, we come on here, we really want to be positive to start out the show, and that's why, we always try with the banner moment to say something positive. Indiana's second half was really good. But let's go back to that first half, because, if you, again, Indiana won, and so everything feels good now. But go to assemblycall.com/halftime after this to get a flavor of how the first half was, which was not good. And let's talk about the first half real quick, Andy, so that we don't forget about it. I mean, Indiana really – here's what I thought, which is Indiana jumped out to that 15-2 lead, but I didn't think that we came out playing especially good defense. Alcorn State was going anywhere they wanted. They just couldn't do anything with it. And Indiana would slap at the ball after their man drove by them, and Alcorn State wasn't tough enough to hang on to the ball, and we got a lot of steals that way. And we let Alcorn State hang around because they're getting offensive rebounds. We just shot well. And we shot lights out because Alcorn State can't defend. So, I mean, as encouraging as that second half was, we have to go back and look at that first half and talk about how discouraging it was. Because for Indiana, I thought to come out like that in the first half after what we saw in Maui, you know, and rely on good shooting against a bad defensive team to mask the same issues over and over again, in a lot of ways, as I think back about this game, that's as discouraging as the second half was encouraging. Because if we come out and play like that against Duke, number one, we're not going to get as many clean looks, and so there's no way we're going to shoot as good a percentage, and they're just going to dominate us, getting easy buckets and turning any shots they do miss into offensive rebound putbacks. And that's what Indiana has to fix. I mean, as you think back about the first half, how concerned are you, and how much did the second half performance assuage those concerns?
You know, when I think of the first half, I tweeted this out at one point, and I think I mentioned it on one of the, I think it was after the Wake Forest game, is that, you know, there's guys just kind of hanging back trying to block shots instead of actually rotating over and getting in position to either take a charge or cut off a drive and things like that. You know, I tweeted that after a specific play in the first half where Troy could have gotten over but just tried to make a spectacular block. And it's no different in some ways than talking about, you know, making the simple play offensively and not, you know, jumping to pass and not trying to get too fancy and just taking the simple play. I think this team gets sucked into that on defense a little bit as well, where, you know, the you know, swat off the backboard or into the 8th row of the stands or a steal that leads to a run out and a dunk is far more spectacular, but against good teams, you're not going to be able to get away with the things that you're able to. And so against a team like Alcorn State, against some of the, you know, exhibition teams, the first couple games of the season, IU's just that much better than they are athletically, that you're going to be able to mask a lot of things there. And so I definitely felt that way. And then the other thing that does is it gets guys out of position to rebound. And one of the things I thought, particularly over the last couple of years, that I had talked about was just some of the fundamental, you know, technique on, you know, blocking out, rebounding, things like that had been really good. And this year, both, you know, either because of you know, guys getting out of position trying to block shots, or just guys watching the ball and really not, you know, paying enough attention. I thought that's been an area that they struggled. I thought they struggled with that a lot in the first half tonight, where just weren't even in a position to get a body on people and didn't know where their man was and anything like that. So I do think, you know, that was concerning. I think the second half, I mean, it makes you feel a little bit better, but they also use the second half to experiment with the zone, a little bit of a press and things like that. So they didn't necessarily do the same things offensively or defensively that they did in the first half. So I don't know that it makes me feel all that much better, especially when you look at some of the things that Duke really does well. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more. You know, Grayson Allen has been really good attacking the basket, except for that Kentucky game. He's just been, you know, just killing people driving to the hoop. And so, you know, he's a guy they're going to have to contain. And they've got, you know, what I believe is the last in the endless supply of Plumlees that's there. And they've also got what's the guy's name? They've also got Emil Jefferson, who's one of the best offensive rebounders in the country. So, you know, those are the kind of things that you see in a game like this against a team with far less talent, and then you kind of spin that forward and say, all right, what is this going to mean in a game against better competition? And it doesn't take long to see with the opponent that's coming up next that you're going to get burned for those, and you're also not always going to shoot 70% or whatever, you know, ungodly percentage it was in the first half that you're going to be able to do that game in, game out against, you know, better teams. I mean, IU tonight really got whatever shot it wanted whenever it wanted.
Yeah, and we certainly can't expect that at Cameron Indoor. So, Ryan, let me ask you. I mean, again, we probably didn't learn a lot about Indiana tonight against Alcorn State, and so we want to talk about this game, but we don't want to belabor it because, I mean, frankly, I think we learned a lot more about Indiana in those 3 games in Maui, and Andy did a great job on the post-game show after the UNLV game. Michael Dugan, our intern, did a phenomenal job after the St. John's game, breaking that one down. Thank you both for stepping up and doing those solo shows. And Ryan, we got some of your insights on Twitter and in emails, but kind of sum it up. I mean, what you saw out there in Maui and how what you saw translates into a matchup at Cameron Indoor coming up on Wednesday.
Well, that trip started badly and ended worse, and wasn't that great in the middle either. It's all 3 games were just a disappointment. You saw bright spots. I thought Max Bielfeldt and Nick Zeisloff were the bright spots of the trip, and other than that, I didn't see a whole lot. I think that they absolutely collapsed against Wake Forest. That was one of those games that you're in a new environment, you've traveled all the way out there, maybe you're uncomfortable, and you sense, okay, this is going to be closer than it should be, but at some point Indiana will get a lead and, kind of stretch it out, and that'll be it. And they did that. They got about a 9-point lead with a few minutes left, and then they stopped playing basketball. I mean, it was, and Wake Forest just went right by them, scored at the end, win it, go on. And then against St. John's, they just let a bad team hang around all night, or all afternoon. And then against UNLV, it was the same thing. UNLV tried to hand that game to Indiana about a dozen times. Indiana just would not take it. And I don't know if they were just uncomfortable being there or if that's the team that this is. I really don't know. But they just looked uncomfortable the entire time. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the arena, if it was the travel, what. But they just did not look like they were comfortable playing there. They didn't look like they were comfortable playing together. I don't think it was a lack of effort. I know I heard a lot of that on Twitter. Just they're not playing hard. No, they were playing hard. They just weren't doing the right things. They weren't playing smart, and they weren't. It was almost like they were trying to do the spectacular when the solid would have won them all 3 of those games. So yeah, it was just a disappointing trip. Hopefully it's a trip they can learn from because there's a lot of bad film. And Crean in his final press conference said that he's going to take every bad play from that tournament and put it on film, and they're going to watch it a lot because there was a lot there that they can fix that was just terrible. And he's right. I mean, I sat there watching it, and I felt like I had to take a shower after every game because it was so bad. I mean, it was disgusting basketball. And so yeah, I mean, the trip was a wash. It was absolutely a waste, and it could really hurt them long term that they wound up not getting to play a Vanderbilt, not getting to play a Kansas, and wound up losing to teams like Wake Forest, who was getting smashed by Rutgers earlier tonight, and lost to a UNLV that is a very talented team but is very young and probably won't do much this year. So, I mean, all in all, I mean, the trip was it seemed like a complete waste from a basketball perspective. Hopefully they learned from it. I don't know if that's the case, and we'll find out against Duke on Wednesday whether they have turned it around quickly because they will need to.
Yeah, 2 quick things before you jump into something else, Jared. One, Rutgers was Rutgers and blew the lead and ended up losing that game just a minute ago. And then the other is I was listening to the pregame show tonight on my way home from work, and heard just caught the tail end of Crean's interview with Don Fisher, and one of the things that was brought up was that some of the players, and I think the ones he singled out were Yogi, Max, and Zeisloft, got together on their own to watch some of the film of those games, and I thought that was, hopefully an encouraging sign. Trying to recognize that, trying to show some leadership, and pull guys together and look at some of these mistakes and try to get them corrected. So again, that stuff is only as effective as the degree to which they make the corrections. But I thought at least was a somewhat encouraging sign that they were starting to take a little bit of that on their own. Not that they surely didn't get an eyeful of some of that film from the coaching staff as well.
No, that is a good sign. I mean, on a team where we've been looking for internal leadership, that's a good sign that we see that. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. Yeah,
I just want to say that, I mean, again, when you've got a guy who's been a coach for a long time somewhere, sometimes you need the voice to change a little. I mean, sometimes you have very successful coaches that after a while you have to have a coaching change just because you need a different voice. Well, I mean, that can work with players too. If Yogi's been harping on it for years that these guys need to do this, I mean, this is just an example, or somebody has been harping on it for years and nobody's listening, somebody else needs to step up and say something too. So it's the same with the coach. If your coach is harping on the same issues over and over and over again, at some point that loses its effectiveness, and you need internal leadership to lift you up. So that is an encouraging sign that the players are saying, hey, no, this is serious. We need to fix this. we'll see if it gets done. As Andy said, it's only as effective as you perform on the court. So we'll see.
Hey, Ryan, I want to go back to something you said about Maui, because you talked about how the team was playing hard. We hear that a lot where, guys talk about how it doesn't seem like the guys are playing hard. And I think there's a difference, tell me if you agree, between playing hard and playing tough. And a lot of times, we see Indiana playing hard in terms of, like, they're moving and they're working up a sweat and they're running hard. But the problem is we're certainly not a smart team in a lot of areas. I mean, offensively, a lot of times we are, outside of the just totally boneheaded turnovers that kill us. Defensively, we seem like we don't have a clue sometimes. But we're just not a very tough team. And I've started to have this feeling we play teams like Alcorn State where we're kind of a basketball bully in a little bit. Like against these teams like Alcorn State, where we can punch first and the other team can't really hit back, like we'll kind of play tough and we'll play hard and we'll make shots and we'll do all these things. But against teams that can punch back and really get up in us and play physical and match us shot for shot, a lot of times it seems like we wilt from those challenges a little bit, whether it's a Wake Forest or whether it's a UNLV, and especially when it's away from the friendly confines of Assembly Hall. And that seems to me like the next step for guys like James Blackman Jr., for example, who can light up in Alcorn State like nobody's business. And he was terrific tonight. I mean, not just anybody can go score 33 points in a college basketball game. James Blackman Jr. played really well. His shooting was incredible. I thought his defense led to offense a lot of times. It was a great performance. But now, as a lot of people said on Twitter, okay, what's going to happen against a tough team like Duke? Is he going to come out and go 1 for 10 and not play defense? And that, especially for a guy like him, seems like the next step. Instead of just being kind of a bully where you take advantage of and play tough against teams that can't really hit back, can you take the first punch, come back, and still play tough? And that seems to me to be the thing that this team, this program, hasn't really done since 2013, is be able to do that. Do you agree? I mean, do you see that kind of that difference between playing hard and playing tough?
What I see is a lot of guys looking around with puzzled looks on their faces when they do get punched in the mouth. And that could be a lack of toughness. It could just be just a lack of a really strong on-court leader. I don't know, but it certainly does seem that when a team does surprise them, they don't respond well, and sometimes it takes a whole half to respond to that kind of thing. They are an effort team. They do play hard. They dive after balls. They do all that stuff. So it's not a lack of hustle. It's not a lack of intensity. It's a lack of, like you said, probably toughness is a part of it. And another thing is just general basketball IQ smarts, specifically on defense. That, and I wrote this in one of the emails that we sent out in my review of Maui. They do a lot of over-pursuing on the perimeter. I mean, if you're not good guarding the dribble, you should not play super tight defense on the perimeter. You should give the guy space and make him shoot. If you can't guard him, play him to shoot. Let him shoot. And you see guys, they're playing right up on guys on the perimeter, and people drive right by them because they know they're terrible defenders. So it's just a lack of awareness there. And your coaches can tell you enough, don't do that, I don't know if that's what they're telling them, but I'm saying your coaches can tell you, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. But until your instincts tell you don't do that, you're not going to change. And so it needs to be instinctive defensively to just say, hey, you know what? This guy hits 5 threes and beats us. Fine, we'll take that. It's better than layups every single time. And we've seen that those layups happen. It's not like it's not like they're risking something by letting the guys shoot, because the guys are getting to the hoop every time. So one more thing I want to bring up, though, is you said that Indiana's a bully against these bad teams. But and then they wilt when they're facing a competition that comes in. But let's remember, this team plays its best in Tom Crean's years. This team has always played its best when it's an underdog, always.
Good point.
And always. And when it went into Maui, they were one of the favorites. It was them and Kansas were the favorites, and they wilted. So I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they went into Duke and beat Cameron. It went into Cameron and beat Duke. I would not at all, because that's just the way this works with them apparently. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, and I don't know if that would be my pick, but I will say that this team always, Tom Crean is amazing at getting a team who's an underdog to play well. It's the other end of the spectrum that needs work.
Good point.
Yeah, just one quick thing to kind of hit on what Ryan did. I think he touched on something I tweeted this out earlier. I think we talked about this in some of the games last week. Tonight Alcorn State comes in shooting 29% from three-point range, and we are pressuring them on the outside. And it's not like you have to take 4 steps back off of them, but You don't have to get right up into a guy who you have no reason to believe is going to burn you from out there. And so I think, again, to that point, it isn't necessarily effort, that there's an activity level, but it isn't necessarily doing the right things. I think back to the old, I think it was John Wooden quote, never mistake activity for achievement. And it just feels like guys think because I'm running around and I'm trying to do something that's good enough. And against a team like this, it probably is, just because you can overcome so much more. But there has to be, some kind of planning and strategy and all those kinds of things that you want to see a little bit more. And that's why, to me, I'm like, with a team like this, let them make a few threes, and then you can press out a little bit more. But if you know you're struggling with something, you're just exaggerating a weakness that you already have by trying to be overly aggressive.
Hey, Will, you had a stat that you found that was relatively interesting.
Yeah, regarding offensive rebounds for Alcorn State, they actually rank 84th in the country in that, so it's like their one strength, which, I mean, they're pretty weak all across the board, but that's like their one thing that they're good at. And then another thing, like you kind of hit on today, obviously we're pretty poor lately shooting the free throw. 311th in the KenPom ratings, but we averaged 62.4% per game, and they stepped it up today, 77 in the first half, 75 in the second, good for 76 overall, so that was a good overall improvement for them coming into this game.
Yeah, and got to the line more with the 25 attempts, which was nice to see, because obviously early in the season, Indiana hasn't been getting to the line as much. Couple interesting questions that we want to get to here in a second. I do want to let everybody know a lot of you have asked us how you can support the show. We always appreciate it when you do. If you go to assemblycall.com/support, we actually have some ways there that you can become a patron of the Assembly Call, support us with what we do here on the show, the trip that we're all going to take in January to get out there to Bloomington for a game and a meetup. So there are many different options that you can find. assemblycall.com/support is that URL if you would like to do that, and we greatly appreciate all of the generous efforts and gifts of support that those of you have given us. So we really appreciate that. Questions. So let's go. We've got a question from Never Daunted. I believe that is our buddy Shimbo, who asks about Crean's press conference earlier today. He says it struck him as tone deaf in terms of recognizing what our actual issues are, whether we can or should be using them as an excuses at this point. Andy and Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on this. Listening to Tom Crean's pre-Alcorn State press conference was infuriating to me, and I don't know if you guys listened to it. And I talked about this on Twitter earlier today. It was just, and this is where he talked about how, we have such a young front line and how losing Emmett Holt really hurt us. And, hey, we've got to remember how young we are up front. And I just am so sick and tired of hearing the excuses. Like, do we have some young guys up front? Yes, but I feel like for 8 years now, we've been young at certain positions, and we've had this, that, or the other deficiency, and it constantly gets brought up. And I think I speak on behalf of certainly a lot of IU fans that I've interacted with that were just sick of hearing it, because it seems like it gives the team, even who clearly listens to their coach, when he says things like this, a built-in excuse for not playing up to a certain standard. And when you look at successful sports organizations, be they professional, be they collegiate, you hear a lot of the standard is the standard and next man up, and the expectations don't change. And with Indiana basketball, it seems like the expectations are always changing, and they're malleable based on the roster and based on the year and based on the given circumstances, and there's always a ready-made excuse for this, that, or the other deficiency. And I think we all just want to see a certain standard. That's what we're holding it to, and the guys that are on the floor get held to that standard no matter what. And to me, it was infuriating to listen to. I'd love to get your thoughts on it first, then you, Ryan. If you heard it, and even if you didn't hear it, I know that you guys are as frustrated as I am, at least I think so, about this constant parade of excuses that we get when things don't go as they're supposed to.
Yeah, so to be honest, I didn't hear it, although it sounds like some of the comments that were made after one of the last game in Maui about the team, not having the front line that they thought they would and things like that, which I think I tweeted out with some comments about how absurd it was. So if it was anything along those lines, then I guess I did hear it in some form or fashion. But I absolutely agree. I think that I feel like it's a little bit like what Ryan said too about like hearing the same voice over and over again. I think as a fan base, I think people are getting numb to that. To come out after some of these games and say, whatever the first one was. Oh, changing defenses. We should have done that. And all these things after the fact that, we have a lot to work on defense. Well, no kidding. And I understand that, like, there's only so much that you can say. But I do think some of the excuses and the comments and the things that feel like they're just, a broken record to a certain extent, like they're just, ringing hollow at this point, because you're not seeing that. You're seeing I mentioned this after the game, it's UNLV. I'm going to hold guys accountable, and I'm going to bench guys and change the starting lineup. Well, then, the very next game, you see guys doing the same thing, and they're not really taken out. And so, I know you can make the argument on defense. I'm not sure who you'd put in. It's a fair argument, but I just think a lot of that stuff is ringing hollow, and I think even if it's valid, I think people just don't care anymore, and I don't care anymore. Other teams go through this all the time. I was talking to somebody that I work with today. They're talking about the Dayton-Xavier game in one of the pre-conference tournaments. Dayton's playing without their best player, who's gotten suspended. That's not what Archie Miller thought he would have, but they were out there fighting, and they gave Xavier, who's a really good team, a really tough game of it, and they played really well. I think they beat Iowa in that tournament. They played really well. Other teams have things happen that are somewhat outside of their control, and you could argue that the things that happened to IU's front line were a bit more in Crean's control in terms of how previous things have been handled. Teams go through things all the time. People lose players from year to year. People lose players to suspensions and injuries that they don't know, and I don't feel like everybody's constantly banging the drum that that's the reason for it. Now, maybe they are, and I just don't know it because I don't follow other programs as closely as I do IU, but I definitely think it's starting to ring hollow, and maybe it's that whole, the same voice thing that we talked about at the players' hearing, and that the fans are starting to get the same way. But, to me, at this point, like, I don't think those are valid excuses. You have to be able to, at this level, make adjustments, play with what you have, and find the way to be most effective with what you have, and even make other teams adjust to what you're doing and not the other way around.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, longtime fans of the show know that, you're a USC football fan, and that's clearly a program that has a certain standard. I mean, they, are measured by that standard. What do you think of the excuses that we often hear coming out of IU basketball?
No, I think it's ridiculous. I do. I think that, it's one thing when you lose 4 1,000-point scorers, you're going to have excuses the next year. At this point, it's absurd. I mean, you recruited these guys. You guys brought this in, you brought these guys in. You knew you were going to play with these guys. You've known this since, last year. The only guy who's gone is the only guy who's gone that you thought would be here is Emmett Holt, really. I mean, you lost Devin Davis and Honor months ago. So, it's interesting that he goes there. I mean, and that's what I was going to say is you're a month into the season. Those excuses don't exist anymore. You've only played a couple games, but you're a month into the season. You had an entire offseason with these guys. It's time to grow up and really, this is what you have and this is what you're going to have for the rest of the year. So continuing to harp on your youth and all that stuff is just stupid. You're going into Duke, you're going into Cameron. Don't give them a built-in excuse that, well, we're young and this is a tough environment. I mean, just step up at some point and, blame the issues on more than just youth, because there are plenty. I mean, Kentucky's young. They're number 1 right now. Duke is young. They're number 7. So, at some point you've got to learn how you got to do one or two things. You either got to stop complaining about it, or 2, learn how to deal with it. And it can't be somewhere in the middle.
I agree, and your youth, your freshman is a 4 or 5-star center, and then you've got Max Bielfeldt, who's a 5th-year guy. Colin Hartman plays a lot on the front line. He's an experienced player. Troy Williams plays 4. Sometimes he's an experienced player. So just to answer your question, yes, it rings totally hollow. And I think a lot of IU fans are sick of it, and rightfully so. Will, you got an interesting point coming out of the press conference, which perhaps hints at, again, maybe some more internal leadership starting to develop in this program, hopefully.
Yeah, according to Zach Osterman, James Blackman said during the press conference tonight that apparently after Wednesday night's loss to UNLV, they had a players-only film session in Maui. So apparently, like you said, some accountability and some internal leadership apparently are brewing here.
Yeah, and look, for this team to get where it wants to go where we think it could go, where it has the potential to go, that leadership has to come internally, because those teams in 2012 and 2013, that leadership was internally driven. It's not to discount the role that Tom Crean had, but guys like Victor Oladipo and Cody Zeller and Jordan Hulls and Christian Watford, those guys took a lot of ownership for what was happening. And that can be, if that starts to happen with this team, that can be a big turning point, and perhaps Maui can then be something that we learn from and something that we look back on as an important turning point. But before we get ahead of ourselves, and I'm more guilty of this than anybody, buying into the hype and the talk and the chatter rather than the results, let's actually see it happen on the floor. Let's see the results on the floor of this potential internal leadership. And the first chance that we can get that is Wednesday night against Duke, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that game. Andy, you mentioned some of Duke's players earlier, and obviously Grayson Allen is a guy that seems to be emerging into a star here in his sophomore season. How does Indiana match up with Duke? I mean, is this a game where you look at it that Indiana, outside of us shooting lights out, which we know if we shoot lights out, we have a chance against anybody, but outside of that kind of performance, is this a game in an arena that Indiana can compete in?
Duke's kind of an odd mix of guys. They've got they've got a few good freshmen again, not quite to the level of what they had last year, obviously, with Okafor and Tyus Jones, but they got another freshman point guard in Derek Thornton, who's been kind of up and down over the course of the season. From a efficiency standpoint, he's got the lowest rating of the guys who play a lot for them, and I think that's what you expect. I don't know that they hope to have him as involved, or I guess as he has been this early on. I think it was something that they probably envisioned for later in the season, but he's really been pushed into playing more of that role. So I think, if you're looking for a place where IU may have an advantage, I think with the senior in Yogi and a freshman in Thornton, that's potentially an area. But they've so they've got him, and Brandon Ingram is the kind of big name freshman this year. So he's I think he's got just looking at this now, got the second lowest efficiency rating, but he's been he's tall, but doesn't have a lot of bulk on him, so he's going to play a little bit more on the wing. He's 6'9", 190, at least what he's listed at on here. So he's had some ups and downs as well, as you'd expect from a freshman. Really struggled against Kentucky, which isn't shocking given the the size that they have inside and the strength that they've got there. But he's done most of his damage against the worst teams on their schedule. So his best few games have been against Bryant, Siena, and Yale. So he has struggled a little bit against bigger competition. So that's a guy who probably matches up with Troy, I would guess. I think the big concern is going to be, inside. I mentioned Marshall Plumlee. Emil Jefferson, I think, though, is a guy who, another 4-year guy who's really, really evolved over his time there. A good rebounder, particularly on the offensive end. Currently top 10 in offensive rebounding percentage, shooting 70% from 2-point range. So getting a lot of baskets there. They're going to have to do a good job of trying to keep those guys off the glass, and the kinds of blockout fundamentals that have just been missing tonight, like I mentioned tonight, are really going to have to step up. And then they've got Matt Jones, who's a bit more experienced, a junior. He's shooting really well from 3-point range, as is Grayson Allen. Then Luke Kennard is another freshman they had. He had a breakout game their last game out. I think they played Utah State yesterday, and he played really well. So he's been hasn't necessarily played a ton of minutes, but he's there. So they've got an odd mix of, they've got a few seniors and juniors who have played quite a bit, and then they've got a lot of freshmen, like Grayson Allen, kind of there in the middle, who really didn't play a ton last year, emerged in the Final Four, and has taken that on this year. And really, outside of that Kentucky game, he's been really tough to beat, and really attacks the basket. He's already gotten to the free throw line almost 50 times this season, shooting well from 2-point range and 3-point range. So how IU finds a way to defend him, and who's able to step up and take that challenge, if anyone is really going to go a long way toward that, because right now Duke is the number 1 offense in the country in terms of adjusted efficiency, at least coming into tonight. So that's going to be a pretty big challenge for a team that has struggled so much on offense. So in addition to shooting lights out, as IU will probably need to do, they're really going to be challenged defensively, and I'll be interested to see what, if anything, different they try, and where, if at all, they fit in any of the kind of press and zone type of looks that they showed in the second half tonight.
Yeah, aren't we gonna have to maybe play some zone? How are we gonna defend Grayson Allen? We can't keep Alcorn State out of the lane. That's what I'm wondering about this matchup. Is how do we keep him out of the lane? I realize this is a rhetorical question that has no answer. But
yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, he has shot the three really well, but again, I'd rather take my chances with a guy who's shooting, from the outside as opposed to, driving to the basket where he's really effective, makes plays that really going to get the crowd into the game and things like that. But I really don't know because, to this point, there's no logical choice in terms of who would really defend him. I think coming into the season, we may have hoped that Robert Johnson becomes, a really tough defender out there. I think he's probably too big for Yogi to play. He's about 6'5". So it seems like Robert Johnson maybe is the best bet, but I know he seems to have struggled more than, maybe we thought he would coming in. But I think one-on-one matchup, that may be where that comes down to, or if it's really a case where, Troy wants to buckle down and try to, try to take on that challenge and show that he can be something defensively. But I think that obviously should scare us all quite a bit. But
How about this name? How about this name for a stretch on Grayson Allen? OG Anunoby.
Yeah, maybe.
I was going to suggest
athleticism.
Morgan out.
Yeah. I was going to suggest Dan Dockich. He could borrow OG shorts.
Nice.
We could use them.
We could.
They'll double leave suit up.
Will, you've got a couple stats about the Dukies.
Yeah, I think that obviously, Andy's touched on a lot of this, but obviously number one offense right now according to adjusted efficiency, but they don't turn the ball over a lot, which I think is okay considering the fact that we don't turn the ball. We don't force the turnovers all the time, so that's just going to be another aspect that we're just kind of used to. But something that I'm looking at that's going to be going in our favor a little bit is Duke's ranked 267th against the deep ball. So obviously we can shoot from lights out down there if we're hot. So we're gonna have to come in with our best shooting game. Hopefully Blackman didn't shoot everything that he could for this week tonight. But if he can do something similar that he did tonight on Wednesday, that would be great. Other than that, just looking at it, obviously Duke's just a really overall sound team.
Ryan, let me ask you this question. What about Yogi on a guy like Grayson Allen? We've seen Yogi in matchups against guys like Nick Stauskas, kind of take the challenge, rise up. I think we all agree that for Indiana to have a chance against Duke, Yogi's going to have to play like he did last year against Maryland. Have transcendent games where he's scoring, in the mid-20s, probably dishing 5 or 6 assists and getting 5 or 6 rebounds. It's going to take that kind of performance from Yogi in a tough environment to lead his team, and especially some of the younger guys. But what about him on a guy like Grayson Allen? I don't know. What do you think, Ryan?
I'm sure he's going to get a shift on him. I think that the way they're going to have him for a little bit, that could be a friggin' disaster, but you just have guys helping, but that's going to leave three-point shooters open. So I think that you're going to have different guys rotating. Yogi will definitely get his shot. I don't think that's we could really use a guy like Christian Watford right now who is tall, has that length that could guard somebody like that, where you give him a couple steps and still have the length to harass a shot. But as Andy just mentioned in the chat, that Yogi, the key issue there is foul trouble, because look, Grayson Allen at home, foul calls. Just prepare yourself for that.
All right, Ryan's breaking up.
Here's the key for me to that entire Duke game. Troy can't. Oh.
All right, Ryan, we're going to mute you for a second. Yeah, you're breaking up for us. Andy, do you want to finish that regarding Yogi and the foul emphasis?
Yeah, I just think we've seen, it happened even last night in the final of the, I think the Wooden Legacy. Denzel Valentine got taken out of the game pretty early on, picked up a couple early fouls against Providence, and then for Providence, second half, Chris Dunn, I think, ended up with 4 fouls and got taken out. So, particularly in a road environment at Cameron, the whistles should be Cole Center-esque, I would assume. So you're going to definitely want to, make sure that they don't get in those situations. And this is a game where, we talk about, I think, one of the big stretches against, I think it was UNLV, where UNLV really had a good run there toward the second half after IU had tied it. It was Yogi was out of the game. And I think, against a really good team, it's just going to underscore the importance of being able to have him out there. from a just floor leadership and those kinds of things. And I think that might be a risk that IU just can't afford to take with putting him on him defensively, because the one thing that Allen's going to do, like I said, he's gotten to the free throw line already about 50 times, and I think they may have played 6 games. Got a pretty high free throw rate, so he's going to attack the basket. You can be sure that that team is going to have watched film of IU and just try to put their head down and get to the rim whenever they can. So that's the only thing that concerns me. I guess it concerns me quite honestly to a certain extent about everybody, but I think Yogi is a guy that IU really can't work around and afford to lose. So I think that would be my main concern with trying to go that route, even though, to your point, he's shown the ability to rise to some of those challenges on the defensive end over the course of his career.
And this was always going to be a big game, but how much bigger is it given what happened in Maui and given the fact that Indiana didn't get a chance to play Vanderbilt, didn't get a chance to play Kansas? Like, doesn't that heighten, put even a little bit more? I mean, Indiana goes into this game as an underdog. People aren't really expecting Indiana to win, so there's not necessarily pressure from that sense. Indiana can play the underdog role. But if you really step back, and I know it's early to look at this, but it's never really too early to start looking at this stuff. Isn't there a little bit more pressure on Indiana to win this game? I mean, really, with only 2 chances to get, this would be a marquee win. The Notre Dame win would be a good win. That kind of puts a little bit of pressure on Indiana here, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. It touched on this a little bit after one of the shows. We talked about it a little bit even after the first game, just what that kind of meant overall for how the rest of Maui would shake out, and then talked about it again after the third game. In Notre Dame, for as good as that looked before, and I don't think they're a bad team by any means, but they've already lost to Monmouth and Alabama, both in a tournament as well. They did beat Iowa in the middle of those 2 games, but they really haven't looked great, particularly in those games. They only beat Milwaukee by 8, and then lost to Monmouth by 2, lost to Alabama by 1. So they don't have a great resume as of yet, although they've got a few other chances where I think they can pick up some non-conference wins. But this game becomes huge for IU. I think winning obviously is one thing, but I also think to prove to themselves and to anybody else around that they actually can play with good teams, and I think that would go a long way. I'm not advocating to shoot for the moral victory by any means, but I do think having a good showing there would do a lot to restore some of the confidence that these guys may have lost in Maui. And while tonight's game is great, being able to hang 112 on somebody, again, to be able to go in there and play a good game in a tough environment, I think would go a long way to making these guys feel like they put some of the issues behind them. I know I saw Troy said something about that in the postgame where, Maui's in the past, all that's done, whatever. I think that would go a long way toward doing that. But they certainly, I don't want to say can't afford. It's too early to start talking about that. But to go 0-2 in these last 2 good games is going to be really problematic, because then you're going to have to do so well in the Big Ten that it really puts a lot of pressure on from that regard. So it isn't a must-win by any means, but I think it's would certainly be a great one to have, and I think if for nothing else, just from a confidence standpoint, it's going to be really important for them to play well.
Let's prepare some final thoughts here and close this up. But I do. There's a great comment from Never Daunted in the chat, says, and referring to the players only film session, says, "Oh, to be a fly on the wall for that film session. I want to know who was working the pause button and pointing out poor spacing, overhelping, etc." Not surprised by those 3 names that were cited. This offseason, we kept talking about needing to find a leader, but leadership by committee off the court could work just as well. It's still Yogi's team. Maybe he has some field generals this year to ease him into that role and have his back. And I think that could be really important, because this leadership role was kind of thrust on Yogi even as early as his freshman year, really, because he was given the ball as a point guard for a team that was ranked number 1. And so much has been expected of him, not just as a player, not just as a scorer, as a distributor, but also as a leader. And he's done it with his play, but he has seemed reluctant to do it sometimes with his example, and in some senses, certainly when he was younger, and vocally in a lot of ways. And maybe that can help, having some more experienced guys now, like Bielfeldt, who's been around the Big Ten, and Zeisloft, who's now been here for over a year. Hopefully, those guys and others can help him, and there can be more of a group effort with leadership. Because Tom Crean's 2 good teams in 2012 and 2013, they had it. It wasn't one guy. It was a group. And so if some of these players only ownership, let's take ownership of this team in this season, if that's indicative of what's going on below the surface, that's something that we didn't see last year, that we haven't seen in a couple of years, that could be something that could be a good sign, as we mentioned earlier. So really hope that that is the case. We will see. But again, Indiana wins tonight. The final score was 112-70, and frankly, if Indiana had kept their starters out there those final 4 minutes, they might have been able to hang 120. It was just that kind of night where Indiana was hitting everything. We don't know exactly what it means, but we'll find out against Duke if this team is ready to play. Let's wrap things up with some final thoughts. Mr. Bottoms, we'll go to you first.
All right. Well, I mean, like I said, I don't know that there's a whole lot we can take from this game. I was happy with the effort in the second half, and I really just hope that's something that can carry over. I think as we look forward to the game, against Duke on Wednesday night, getting off to a good start is going to be really important. That's going to be an environment unlike most, if any, place these guys have ever played before, and so whatever they can do at the beginning of the game to try to at least take a little bit of the air out of the balloon, I think is going to be, going to be really important. And that starts with protecting the basketball and trying to play with better effort on defense. And we've seen this team do some things well on the defensive glass. They definitely will need to do that here, and I think that's something to watch for early. And I think it's something I mentioned in one of the other games. It might have been that UNLV game, was turnovers and defensive rebounds and how well this team can handle those couple things. They really just need to, again, prevent those easy baskets. They can't allow easy baskets like they did in the first half tonight, because a team like Duke is going to convert those at a much higher rate. And in addition, they're just going to be able to score more out of their normal offense. So, as I look forward to that game, I do think these guys will, they seem to have a way to rise to the occasion of the opponent. But how are they able to start with that, and are they able to sustain it for the entire game, I think is going to be really important. And I'm hoping that we learn a lot of good things about this team on Wednesday night, but we're going to learn a lot about them one way or another. I think that's for sure, because this is going to be, I think it could serve as a jumping off point for this team, and I think it could serve as a here we go again and some kind of Maui relapse if it doesn't go well. And so I think how they play, not even necessarily if they win or lose, is going to go a long way toward figuring out what the general tone of these shows is going to be for the remainder of the season.
Mr. Phillips, before your computer cuts out again.
Yeah, sorry about that. The internet kind of just stopped working. Anyway, I kind of echo what Andy said. I think that if they win at Cameron, Maui's forgiven. I mean, it's not forgotten. We know there are still those issues. But I think that all of us are going to sort of be, you know what? Okay, they learned. They moved on. They did something amazing. Do I expect them to win a Cameron? I'm not betting on it. Certainly don't, if you're out there, don't bet your house on it. But I think that, if they play the way they're capable of playing, they could beat Duke. That's just a huge if, One thing that can't happen, Troy can't have 4 turnovers. Blackman can't not show up until 10 minutes are left in the game. I mean, these guys have to come out of the gate and say, look, this is who we are, and we're going to play with you the entire night. They cannot be scrambling to get back a 10-point deficit at some point. They need to come out and do what teams have done to Indiana and punch Duke in the mouth. And I'd be fine if someone actually punched Grayson Allen in the mouth, because he is the most punchable player in college basketball since J.J. Redick. So, it's going to be fun. It's nice to have like a big game. We didn't really seem to have those last year, except for the one against Maryland, and then it all kind of fell apart. It's always fun to have a big, game against another big-time marquee opponent. And let's enjoy it, and hopefully they surprise us all and just blow Duke right off their home floor.
Let's hope so. Will, your final thought?
All right, yeah. Obviously, like everyone's already said, I guess I'm echoing just like everyone else, but didn't learn a lot tonight. Obviously, the quality of the opponent wasn't there, but Wednesday night should bode well. No matter what, even if they don't win, as long as they can play competitive and make it a close game, make it a good game, I think that it'll speak volumes to what this team can do later on down the stretch. Hopefully Blackman can shoot like he did tonight. I kind of mentioned that, but if my memory serves me correctly, he kind of has a tendency to get quiet against those big opponents. So let's hope he doesn't do that this season. This is going to be that first big test for him. Other than that, I think that we're going to have to stop Emil Jefferson. I'm looking at his stats right now. He ranks 7th nationally, getting those offensive boards, which is obviously one of our Achilles heels. So if we can stop him, I think we have a good chance of getting some extra possessions and getting some more points on the board that I know we can score.
Good points, Will. I have to say this about this Duke game. I am not happy with this, we can take something positive if we lose. I get that the reality of the situation going to Cameron, it's not an easy place to play, and the odds are that we won't lose. In fact, Ken Palm has it as 81% that Duke will win. But let's not let Maui totally change what we're thinking. This was still a team that we all thought coming in was a potential Big Ten champion, a potential Elite Eight, Final Four type team. And I realized that we played really poorly in Maui, but we just talked about how it frustrates us when Tom Crean constantly changes the expectations, and because something happens, they get lowered, and it's like then there's a lower expectation that we can now jump over and seem like it's success. I think as fans we should expect, and the Hoosiers should expect, to go in there and win. We have enough McDonald's All-Americans and talented guys and guys dipping their toes in the NBA draft waters in the offseason to be able to feel like we can go into any game and win if we just compete and play smart, play to our strengths, and try to minimize our weaknesses. And again, is it likely? Perhaps not. This may be the toughest game on our schedule the entire season, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't expect to go in and win, because the standard at Indiana University basketball has always been and should be that we can win any game that we play in. And so I think as fans, we should get back to holding that expectation. I've been guilty of not doing it, and we can start that with the Duke game and expect to go in there and win. And hey, sometimes when you hold people to a higher standard, they rise to it. And a lot of times people will rise to the standard that you hold them to, and if you keep the standard down, then they won't know that they can go any higher. This team is good enough to play with anybody, Ryan, as you said. And yes, there's always that caveat of if they play to their potential and all of this. Well, enough's enough. It's December, and this has a chance to be a special season. A lot of guys came back to make it a special season. If that's the case, then go to Cameron Indoor, play hard, play smart, play gritty. When you make a mistake, go hustle to make up for it, and just go in there and get a W. Why not? I'm pretty sure that Yogi is going to step up and play. I have a lot of confidence in him. I think the two guys that it's going to come down to, as it often does in big games for Indiana, are James Blackman Jr. and Troy Williams. I thought Troy was non-existent in the first half tonight. I thought he played well in the second half. I think he had 4 offensive rebounds in the second half. He only had 1 turnover. Although I will say a couple of generous block calls got him out of a couple of offensive fouls, but only the 1 turnover. He's got to play like that and make a couple of big plays for Indiana to give them energy, because I think when Troy plays well on the road, he gives Indiana a lot of energy away from home. And then James Blackman Jr. has to score. He's got to defend, and he's got to score. We've seen those two guys in tough environments be out-toughed and totally taken out of the game. And if these guys are going to be NBA players, they have to step up in games against teams like Duke. And I think the expectation is that they will, and that's why the expectation should be that Indiana can go into Cameron and get that W. And now all that remains to be seen is if they do. And if they do, then I think we can all feel really good about the potential for this season still having a chance to be realized, whereas obviously after what we saw against in Maui, that was a little bit harder to see. But Indiana has a big opportunity on Wednesday night to change the trajectory of this season, and a lot of guys came back to do something special. They can start doing something special Wednesday night at Duke. And after that game, we will be right here to break it all down for you. That is a 9:15 Eastern start on ESPN, so it'll be a late show, but hopefully it is a deliriously just happy and enthusiastic, victorious episode. We hope you'll join us. assemblycall.com/live as always, and make sure that you are on the email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. Don't miss any of our post-game emails. We send them after every game. It'll make you a smarter, more informed IU fan, and it's our way to stay connected with you and continue to build this Assembly Call community up. All right, everybody, thank you very much for tuning in live. Thank you very much for listening on the podcast. It's a quick turnaround. I don't know that we learned a lot about Indiana tonight, but at least we can exhale for 48 hours. The Hoosiers dominated an opponent they should dominate. Now let's go into Cameron and beat an opponent that other people don't think we can. But as Hoosier fans and a Hoosier program, we should believe that we can, and damn it, let's go get a victory. We'll talk to you after IU Duke.